What if I told you that the largest empire in human history destroyed itself? Not through a lost war, not through economic collapse, not through foreign invasion, but because of a 3-penny tax on tea. It sounds absurd, but that's exactly what happened. And the most surprising part is that Britain set this mechanism in motion at the very moment of its greatest victory. The 7 Years' War is over. The British Empire stands at the peak of the world. France is crushed. It loses almost all of its colonies in North America. 3 million square miles of land, compare that to all of Europe, fall under British control. Spain cedes Florida. The British dominate India, the West Indies, and Canada. The sun truly never sets on this empire, but there is one problem. A massive one. And it is measured not in territories, but in pounds sterling. The 7 Years' War cost Britain astronomical sums. The national debt doubled. More than half of the country's annual budget went just to paying interest. Now imagine, you have a vast new empire, and you can't afford to maintain it. Someone had to pay. And in London, they quickly decided who. The 13 colonies on the eastern coast of America had existed for nearly 150 years. Over that time, they had grown into something unexpected. More than 2 million people, their own assemblies, their own trade, their own culture. Less refined, more entrepreneurial, increasingly confident, and this is crucial, barely taxed. A Briton paid 26 shillings a year into the treasury. A resident of New England, 1 shilling. 1. From London's perspective, this looked like a complete injustice. The colonies were protected by the British Army, benefited from British trade routes, and paid almost nothing. Prime Minister George Grenville decided to fix that. 1764, the Sugar Act. Technically, it even lowered the tariff on foreign molasses, but for the first time, it was going to be seriously enforced. British naval ships were ordered to intercept smugglers. This hit the pockets of New England merchants, and they noticed. But the real explosion came the following year. 1765, the Stamp Act. A stamp duty. Sounds boring? Not at all. Any paper in the colonies, a newspaper, a legal document, a trade license, even a playing card, now had to cost a little more because of a special stamp. Britons had been paying this tax for 70 years without complaint. But in the colonies, it caused an uproar. And here comes the first unexpected twist in this story. The issue wasn't really about the money. The sums were trivial. A merchant, a lawyer, a newspaper owner would pay a few extra pennies at most. But colonial leaders seized on a principle. The British Parliament had no right to tax people who had no representation in it. Not a single American sat in Parliament. Therefore, no taxation by Parliament. No taxation without representation spread across all 13 colonies. Grenville replied, "You have virtual representation. Every British MP represents the entire empire, not just their district." The colonists reacted about the way you probably just did, with skepticism. And then something happened that London did not expect. Tax collectors were tarred and feathered, literally, and driven out of towns. Effigies of British officials were hung on liberty trees. Lawyers refused to use stamped paper. Newspapers were printed without stamps. Deliberately. In New York, delegates from 9 colonies gathered and sent a petition to the king. And here comes the first real turning point. Britain backed down. 1766. The Stamp Act was repealed. The colonies celebrated victory. It seemed the crisis was over, but on the very same day Parliament repealed the tax, it passed another declaration. Short, clear, devastating. It stated that Parliament had and would have full authority to make laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. No exceptions. The victory turned out to be an illusion. The principle remained unchanged. London had merely retreated temporarily. While lawyers and merchants argued over constitutional principles, something far bloodier was happening on the frontier. After the 7 Years' War, Britain took control of vast territories inhabited by Native American tribes, former allies of the French. And these tribes had no intention of accepting new rulers. The Ottawa leader Pontiac assembled a coalition of tribes and in 1763 declared war on the British. Every fort west of the Appalachians came under attack. Several fell. The frontier was engulfed in bloodshed. Britain responded in 2 ways. First, military suppression. Second, the proclamation of 1763, which forbade colonists from settling west of the Appalachians. London wanted to stop the conflict by separating settlers from native lands. The colonists saw it differently. They had just fought in that war. They had paid for that land with blood, and now they were told not to go there. London was limiting their expansion? Another cause for outrage. And 1767. A new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Charles Townshend, decides to try again, but more cleverly. If the colonists oppose internal taxes, then let's try external duties. On glass, paper, paint, tea. Technically, not a direct tax, but an import duty. The colonists did not accept this distinction. The Sons of Liberty, an organization that grew out of protests against the Stamp Act, shift to new methods. Their leader in Boston, Samuel Adams, understands isolated protests are weak. There must be coordination. There must be communication between the colonies. And he builds it, a network of letters, couriers, and meetings. Different kinds of people join the Sons of Liberty. Merchant and smuggler John Hancock with money and connections. Dr. Joseph Warren with ideas and courage. Silversmith Paul Revere with a readiness to act. This is no longer just dissatisfied traders. This is an organization. Britain responds with force. In 1768, regular troops arrive in Boston. 2 regiments, redcoats in the streets of an American city. This was meant to calm the situation. The effect was the opposite. March 5, 1770, Boston. Evening. A crowd gathers around a small British detachment near the customs house. Snowballs, stones, insults. The soldiers stand under pressure from hundreds of angry people, and someone fires. To this day, it is unknown who fired first and why, but the volley rang out. When the smoke cleared, 5 Bostonians lay dead. Paul Revere made an engraving of the event, skillfully simplified, clearly propagandistic. The British are depicted as cold killers firing into an unarmed crowd. Technically inaccurate, brilliantly effective. The engraving was reprinted throughout the colonies. The Boston Massacre, a name that would stick forever. And here comes the second unexpected turn. Defending the British soldiers in court was John Adams, a well-known patriot, a future U.S. president, a man who believed in the independence of the colonies, and at the same time believed that even British soldiers deserved a fair defense. 6 of the 8 were acquitted. 2 received minimal punishment. Adams considered this defense the most important case of his life, a demonstration that principles matter more than convenience. The crisis seems to subside. Britain once again backs down, repealing the Townshend duties. Almost all of them. Only one remains. On tea. Symbolic, London says, to affirm Parliament's right to tax. Symbolic, but this symbol will prove to be the final straw. 1773. The British East India Company is on the brink of bankruptcy. Parliament rescues it, granting the right to sell tea directly to the colonies, bypassing middlemen. Tea becomes cheaper than ever. Even with the tax, it would seem perfect. Cheaper tea. What's the problem? The problem is the principle. If the colonists buy this tea, they acknowledge Parliament's right to tax them. Silently, with a sip of tea. The Sons of Liberty decide, No. December 16th, 1773 night, Boston Harbor. 116 men disguised as Native Americans symbolically, deliberately board 3 East India Company ships. In 3 hours, they smash 340 chests of tea and dump the contents into the water. 92,000 pounds of tea. Today, that's nearly $2 million. No other property is touched, no violence, only tea, and only into the water. John Adams wrote in his diary the next day, "This is the most magnificent movement of all. It has dignity, grandeur, and sublimity." London saw it differently. The British government did not see a principled stand. It saw lawlessness, rebellion, and the destruction of private property. The time for concessions was over. Parliament passes the coercive acts. The port of Boston is closed until the damages are repaid. Massachusetts loses self-government. British officials accused of crimes will be tried in England, not in the colonies. The colonists called these laws the Intolerable Acts, and that word said everything. Boston is not alone. Food and support arrive from all the colonies. Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York. For the first time, 13 different quarrelsome, dissimilar colonies begin to act as one. In the autumn of 1774, the First Continental Congress convenes in Philadelphia. Delegates from 12 colonies. They are not yet speaking of independence. Most still consider themselves British subjects defending their rights, but they are already speaking with one voice. This is where one era ends and another begins. From 3 pence on tea to revolution, from the Stamp Act to the Declaration of Independence, from petitions to the king to muskets on the field at Lexington.
The chain was not inevitable from the first link. Every decision could have been different. If Grenville had chosen negotiation instead of decrees, if Parliament had given the colonies real representation, if London had listened to what it was being told, not as rebellion, but as a request. But that didn't happen. And in the spring of 1775 in Lexington and Concord, the first shots were fired. Who fired first remains unknown to this day. But what happened next? You already know. Subscribe so you don't miss the next video, where we'll break down how 13 colonies that never particularly liked each other managed to defeat the most powerful army in the world, and why the British lost a war they were expected to win.